The heavy clink of a glass jar on the Formica counter cut through the morning noise. Every head turned. A little girl stood on her toes, pushing a jar filled with coins toward the large man at the griddle. Her voice was small but steady. "Is this enough to save my mom?" Deacon Deak Miller froze, his spatula hovering over a golden-brown pancake. The usual Saturday chaos, the clatter of cutlery, the laughter, was erased, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed on the eardrums. A German shepherd, lying quietly behind the counter, lifted his head. His ears pricked forward, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. This was Ranger Deak's service animal, a calm presence who was as much a part of the center as the coffee machine.
At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please share and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words.
Deak's eyes, which had seen too much in the deserts overseas, now scanned her face for the truth behind the question, assessing, triaging, just like old times. He slowly set his spatula down. The pancake on the griddle began to smoke, but he didn't notice. All his focus was on the girl. He wiped his hands on his grease-stained apron, the words, "Is this enough to save my mom?" echoing in the space between them. He crouched down, his knees popping, bringing his weathered, kind face level with hers. Up close, he saw the details the crowd couldn't. The faint purple shadows under her eyes, the tight line of her jaw, the way her small shoulders were rigid with tension. This was not a child playing a game. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble, gentle by force of habit. "You hungry? We've got plenty." The offer was automatic, a lifeline back to normalcy. She shook her head, her ponytail swaying. "I need to know," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper yet crystal clear in the quiet room. "If this is enough to take my mom somewhere safe." The silence deepened. Behind Deak, Ranger stood up and took a slow step forward, his wet nose gently nudging the girl's hand. It was an instinctual gesture of comfort. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Deak asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena," he repeated, letting the name settle between them. It was a strong, beautiful name for a girl who was carrying a weight no child should ever know. "That's a good name. Can you tell me what you mean, honey? Take your mom where?" She glanced nervously toward the door, then back at him, her fingers twisting the fabric of her oversized shirt. "Away from him," she breathed out, the words laced with a fear that was all too familiar to the men in this room. "He gets so mad. I think next time he'll really hurt her. But she won't leave." Deak felt an old, cold anger stir in his gut, an emotion he'd worked hard to bury. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "Who is he, Lena?" She shook her head quickly. "Not my dad. Brent. He's her boyfriend. He moved in last year." Her eyes dropped to the floor, to Ranger's concerned face. "He smells like gasoline," she added, a sensory detail that made the threat terrifyingly real. "And he never smiles right. Not with his eyes." The room of veterans, a group of men who had sworn oaths to protect, listened. No one made a sound. No one moved. The mission had just walked in the door, holding a jar of coins. The silence after Lena's words was thick with unspoken memories. It was filled with the memories of every man and woman in the room, memories of conflicts overseas, of lost comrades, of oaths taken to protect the vulnerable. The mission had indeed walked in, not in the form of a commanding officer or a radio directive, but as a child with a jar of coins and a truth that demanded action. The smell of the burning pancake was now a sharp, acrid note in the air, a tangible marker of how completely the morning had been derailed. No one moved to salvage it. Some things were simply more important than breakfast. Deak didn't break his crouch. The world had shrunk to this small circle, a terrified child, a jar of coins, and a truth that was beginning to unspool. "You're safe here, Lena," Deak said, his voice low and steady, a deliberate anchor in her storm. "No one's going to hurt you here. I promise you that." Behind him, a man named Hicks stepped forward. He was older, his beard a thicket of gray, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, that spoke of decades of hard living and harder choices. He didn't crouch, but he leaned his bulk against the counter, making himself smaller, less intimidating. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned Lena's face, then the jar, then her face again. "You walked here alone, kid?" Hicks asked, his tone not accusatory, but deeply curious. Lena nodded, her eyes flicking toward him before returning to Deak, as if the big cook was her primary lifeline. "Yes, sir." "How far?" "6 blocks," she whispered. "Maybe 7. Hicks let out a slow, controlled breath, a valve releasing pressure. He exchanged a look with Deak. It wasn't a look of words, but of understanding. A silent agreement passed between them, forged in years of shared experience and a shared code. This wasn't a social call. This was an intervention. A 10-year-old had just declared a domestic crisis, and they were now the responding unit. The community breakfast was over. The mission was a go. "You're a tough kid," Hicks said, his voice softer now. "Tougher than most grown men I know." It wasn't empty praise. It was a soldier's acknowledgement of courage under fire. At the words, Lena's rigid shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, and she released a breath she didn't seem to know she was holding. Deak reached out, not to touch her, but to gesture toward the back of the hall. "Let's go sit somewhere a little quieter, Lena. You can bring your jar." He stood slowly, his joints protesting. Ranger, ever attentive, fell into step beside him, his body a calm, warm presence between the girl and the rest of the world. They moved to a corner away from a crowd, where a worn leather couch and a few mismatched armchairs formed a loose circle. The noise of the breakfast crowd became a muted backdrop. Deak guided Lena to the couch while he pulled a wooden chair around to face her. The glass jar was placed carefully on the low coffee table between them, a silent third participant in the conversation. The coins inside seemed to hold the light, glittering with a hope that felt both fragile and immense. Before Deak could say another word, a woman named Monica appeared. She hadn't been summoned, but she had a sixth sense for when she was needed. Monica was an Air Force veteran who ran the center's donation and outreach programs. Her real skill, however, was reading people. She could spot a forced smile or a hidden tremor from across the room. She moved calmly, setting a glass of orange juice on the table in front of Lena before taking a seat in an adjacent armchair. Close, but not crowding. Present, but not pressing. "This is Monica," Deak said to Lena. "She's a good person to talk to." Monica offered a small, reassuring smile. "Hi, Lena. That's a very pretty name." She didn't launch into questions. She simply created a space of quiet patience, letting the girl decide what happened next. Ranger settled at Deak's feet, his intelligent eyes watching Lena, providing a silent, furry anchor. Deak leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You said you think Brent will really hurt your mom next time. Can you tell us a bit more about what's been happening? Only what you feel comfortable sharing." Lena wrapped her small hands around the cool glass of juice, but didn't drink. She stared into its bright contents, as if it were a crystal ball. "It's not like in the movies," she began, her voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear. "He doesn't yell all the time. Sometimes he's nice. He bought me ice cream once. He let me watch TV past my bedtime." She paused, and the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. But then something changes. It's like a switch flips. You can feel it in the air before it happens. Monica leaned forward slightly, her expression neutral and open. "What do you feel, Lena?" "Everything gets tight," the girl whispered, her knuckles widening around the glass. "The room gets smaller. Mom starts talking faster, trying to make him laugh or calm down. She'll say things like, 'Let's just have a nice evening, okay?' But her voice shakes when she says it." Lena's own voice began to tremble slightly, mirroring the fear she described. "And he just stares at her. Doesn't blink. That's when I go to my room and close the door." Deak and Monica exchanged a glance. This was the insidious pattern they knew too well. The unpredictable cycles of charm and menace that kept victims trapped and doubting their own reality. The first objective was complete. They had established contact and gained a sliver of trust. The next, more difficult phase was about to begin. The quiet corner of the Veterans Center had become a confessional. Lena's small voice, now that she had started, seemed to gain a momentum of its own, as if the dam holding back her fears had finally broken. The presence of Ranger, who had now shifted to rest his head on her knee, gave her the strength to continue. Her fingers absently stroked the soft fur behind his ears, each pass steadying her breath. "I've never seen him hit her," Lena admitted, her eyes fixed on the patient dog. "Not really. But I've seen what happens after." She described the bruises on her mother's arms like purple fingerprints that Angie would blame on bumping into door frames. She recounted the way her mother would wince in silence when reaching for a high shelf, or how she'd sometimes hold her side after a playful shove from Brent that was a little too hard. "Once," Lena continued, her voice dropping even lower, "I woke up at 2 in the morning. There was noise in the kitchen. I went to look. Mom was on her knees, picking up pieces of a broken plate from the floor. She told me she dropped it by accident." Lena finally looked up, her eyes wide with the memory. But there were too many pieces. They were everywhere. It was like someone threw it. The image was vivid and chilling. It wasn't just the violence, but the cover-up, the silent, middle-of-the-night tidying of a rage that couldn't be contained. Monica and Deak let the silence hang, allowing the weight of the girl's observation to settle. They knew that for a child, this kind of circumstantial evidence was often more terrifying than witnessing the act itself. The imagination filled in the horrifying blanks. Monica's voice was a gentle probe. "Lena, what about your dad? Is he around at all?" The girl shook her head, a gesture too weary for her years. "He left when I was little. I don't really remember him. Mom says he wasn't ready to be a father." She paused, her fingers stilling on Ranger's head. "Brent showed up about a year ago. Mom met him at the diner where she works. He was nice at first. He brought her flowers. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen." A fragile, hopeful flicker crossed her face and then vanished, replaced by a grim acceptance. I thought maybe he'd be like a real dad. But he's not. He's something else." Deak felt his jaw tighten. The story was a classic, tragic pattern. A vulnerable single mother, a charming predator who love bombs his way into their lives, and a child whose hopes are systematically crushed. He kept his voice calm, a steady anchor in her storm. "You mentioned you heard him on the phone, Lena, talking about taking you somewhere. Can you tell us about that?" Lena's entire body went rigid at the memory. Her hand clamped down on Ranger's fur. "It was 2 nights ago," she whispered. "Mom was in the shower. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard him in the kitchen. He was talking really low, like he didn't want anyone to hear." She mimicked his hushed, conspiratorial tone. He said, "I'll take them out of town for a while. Somewhere quiet. No one asking questions." She looked up, and her eyes were wide with the memory of the fear. And then he laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cold, empty sound, like stones dropping in a deep well, and it made my stomach clench. That cold laugh in the dark was the catalyst. It was the moment abstract fear crystallized into an immediate, tangible threat. "That's when I knew I had to do something," Lena said, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. "Mom keeps telling me everything's fine, but it's not. She's scared all the time. She doesn't sleep. She checks the locks 3 times before bed. She hides her phone when he's around." She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, a gesture of sheer exhaustion. "I'm only 10. I can't fight him. I can't make her leave. But I thought maybe if someone else came, someone bigger, someone he couldn't push around, she'd finally see that she doesn't have to stay." Monica's expression was one of profound respect. "You're incredibly brave, Lena. You know that, right? Most adults wouldn't have the courage to do what you just did." Lena shook her head, a fresh tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I'm not brave," she countered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm just tired of being scared." The raw honesty of the statement left a silence in its wake. It was a truth that resonated deeply with the veterans in the room. They knew that kind of exhaustion, the fatigue that comes from constant vigilance, from living in a state of fight or flight. It was a feeling that transcended age and circumstance. Deak rubbed his jaw, his mind shifting from assessment to strategy. He'd seen situations like this before. Storming in with fists raised was a good way to get someone killed. Men like Brent thrived on creating chaos and then playing the victim. If they were going to help, they had to be smarter. They had to be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The intelligence Lena had provided was crucial. They now knew the target, the threat level, and the primary obstacle. Angie's own fear and isolation. But how could he have known the plan was already falling apart? Deak's voice was low and measured, the same tone he'd used to coordinate a medevac under fire. Every word was deliberate. Rule 1. No more danger for you or your mom. But we are not walking away. He glanced at Monica, who gave a slight, confirming nod. This was her area of expertise. Monica here is going to take you home in a little while, Deak continued, his eyes locked on Lena's. But only to talk to your mom. Woman to woman. No pressure, no judgment. Just a conversation. She's going to let your mom know that she has options. That she's not alone. Lena's eyes darted to Monica, searching her face for any sign of hesitation or false promise. This was the moment her entire gamble hinged on. Would this stranger be able to reach her mother, where she had failed? Monica met her gaze steadily. I won't push her, Lena. But I'll make sure she knows there are people who care. And I'll make sure she knows there are options she might not see right now. Options that are safe. The girl was quiet for a long moment, her small hand still resting on Ranger's head. She was weighing the risk, imagining the scene, wondering if this could possibly work. Okay, she finally whispered, the word filled with a tremulous hope. But please, she whispered, her small hand clutching the edge of the table until her knuckles were white. Don't make it worse. She's all I have. Monica's heart ached. She reached out and gently squeezed Lena's other hand. That, Lena, is exactly why we're going to be so very careful. The plan was set. It was fragile, and it depended entirely on a frightened woman being willing to listen to a stranger. But it was a start. It was a first concrete step away from the edge of a cliff. Deak looked at the jar of coins on the table, then at the tired, hopeful face of the child who brought it. They weren't just saving a mother. They were saving this little girl's entire world. He stood up. All right, let's give you two a minute. I need to go have a word with the guys. He and Ranger moved back towards the main hall, where the low hum of conversation had resumed, though it was now laced with a new, serious energy. Hicks was already there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. A few other veterans, a former Marine named Carter, and a Navy vet everyone called Doc, gathered close. They had all seen the girl, heard the silence, and understood the unspoken call to duty. Deak didn't need to give a speech. The kid's name is Lena. Mom's in a bad situation with a real piece of work named Brent. Monica's running point, doing a soft approach with the mother. Hicks gave a grim nod. What's the play for us? Right now we're the backup, Deak said. We stay ready. If this guy gets wind of it and causes trouble, we need to be the wall he can't get through. But we do it smart. No cowboy stuff. We protect them, we don't provoke him. Doc, the former medic, spoke up. Does the mom need medical? The kid. Unknown. We'll have Monica assess. For now, we keep the perimeter secure. Carter, you've got that quiet sedan. If they need a vehicle that isn't Monica's truck, you're it. It was a simple, fluid plan. Each man knew his role. They were a team again, their purpose clear. The mission was a 10-year-old girl and her mother. The objective was their safety. Back in the quiet corner, Monica was preparing Lena for what came next, building her up for the most important conversation of their lives. The inside of Monica's truck felt like a world suspended between realities. The familiar, comforting chaos of the Veterans Center was behind them, and the uncertain, dangerous territory of Lena's home lay ahead. The engine's hum was the only constant. Lena sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her backpack at her feet. She wasn't looking at the passing streets. She was pointing out landmarks of fear. Lena pointed to a corner store. That's where he bought beer before he got really mad last time. Monica drove with a calm, deliberate focus. She didn't fill the silence with empty reassurances. She simply existed within it, a steady presence. She knew the weight a child could carry, the hypervigilance that came from living in a war zone disguised as a home. "His truck isn't here," Lena said, her voice barely a whisper, as if saying it too loud might make it appear. "He usually goes to the auto parts store on Saturdays. Stays out for a few hours." Monica nodded, her eyes scanning the street as she pulled over and parked a few houses down. She killed the engine, and the sudden silence was heavy and profound. She turned in her seat to face Lena, her posture calm and open. "Lena, I need you to let me lead this, okay? Your mom, she might be defensive at first. She might even be angry or scared. That's normal. When people feel trapped, they sometimes push help away." Lena finally looked at her, her brow furrowed with a worry that was far too old for her face. "What if she tells you to leave?" "Then I'll leave," Monica said simply. "But I'll make sure she knows how to reach me first. I've done this before. I know how to listen without pushing. Can you trust me to do that?" Lena studied the woman's face, the steady gaze, the patient lines around her eyes, and gave a single, sharp nod. "Yeah, I trust you." They walked up the cracked concrete path together, a study in contrasts. Lena, small and anxious, her shoulders already tensing for a blow that might not come. Monica, tall and grounded, her movements smooth and non-threatening. The house was a single-story bungalow fighting a losing battle with neglect. Peeling paint near the gutters, a lawn just a little too long. But someone's quiet attempt to make it a home was evident in the flower pots lining the porch steps, bright red geraniums struggling against the overall sense of decay. Lena knocked twice on the front door, a quick, familiar rhythm. Tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. A secret code. Almost immediately, the living room curtain shifted a fraction. A moment later, the door cracked open, the security chain still engaged, and a woman's face appeared in the gap. Angie was younger than Monica had expected, maybe in her early 30s, but life had carved faint, premature lines around her eyes. She had Lena's same brown hair, but it was pulled into a messy bun. Her eyes, also the same shade as her daughter's, were shadowed with a deep, habitual exhaustion. Her gaze jumped from Lena to the stranger beside her, and her body visibly tensed. "Lena? Who is this? What's going on?" Her voice was sharp with a fear she tried to mask as annoyance. "Mom, it's okay." Lena stepped forward quickly, her small body a shield. "This is Monica. She's a friend. She just wants to talk." Angie's eyes narrowed, her grip on the door tightening. "Talk about what?" Monica kept her voice soft and low, a non-threatening murmur. "Just Angie. It's Angie, right? I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not with the state or the police. Lena came to see us this morning at the community breakfast. She was worried about you. I just wanted to check in. That's all." The words "she was worried about you" landed with a tangible force. Angie's face shifted through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, a flash of shame, then a hardening into defensive anger. She looked down at her daughter, a mixture of fear and frustration in her eyes. "Lena, what did you tell them?" "The truth, Mom." The 3 words were quiet, but they fell into the tense silence with the weight of finality. Angie's posture slumped for a fraction of a second. She stared at her daughter, and the fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a weary defeat. She let out a slow breath, then pushed the door closed for a second to slide the chain off. When it reopened, it was wider, but her body remained a guarded barrier in the frame. "Fine. Come in. But make it quick. He'll be back eventually." The air inside smelled faintly of bleach, as if someone had been scrubbing hard to erase all evidence. The house was neat but sparse, the kind of sterile order that comes from constant vigilance. A couch with mismatched cushions, a TV mounted on the wall, a kitchen visible through an open doorway, with dishes drying neatly on a rack. Everything was in its place, but it felt like a stage set, a performance of normalcy. There were no personal photos on the walls, no knickknacks on the shelves that could be thrown in a moment of rage. Monica sat at the small kitchen table across from Angie, while Lena hovered near the doorway, watching, her arms wrapped around herself. The distance between the kitchen and the front door felt deliberately short, an easy escape route. "I'm not going to pretend I know your whole story, Angie," Monica began, her hands resting openly on the table. "But I've seen enough to recognize certain patterns. And I've worked with women who've been through similar situations." Angie crossed her arms over her chest, a human shield. "I don't need a lecture. I'm not here to give one." Monica leaned forward slightly, just enough to convey sincerity without intrusion. "I'm here because your daughter walked into a room full of strangers this morning and asked if a jar of coins was enough to save your life. She let that image hang in the air between them. That took a kind of courage I've rarely seen in adults. And it tells me she sees things clearly, even if you're not ready to." Angie's composure cracked for just a second. Her eyes glistened, and she blinked hard, looking down at the scratched tabletop. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice quieter now, losing its defensive edge. "Brent has his moments, but he's not a monster. He's just stressed. Work's been hard. Money's tight. He doesn't mean to." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "To what?" Monica asked, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "To scare her? To leave marks you have to hide." Angie flinched as if she'd been struck. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She didn't look up. "I can handle it," she whispered, a mantra she had likely repeated to herself 1,000 times. "I believe you think that," Monica replied, her tone never wavering from its compassionate steadiness. "But your daughter shouldn't have to." The truth of those words seemed to physically deflate Angie. Her shoulders slumped, and when she looked up, the anger was gone, replaced by raw, unguarded fear. "What choice do I have?" The question was barely audible. "Where would we go?" "I wait tables. I can't afford a lawyer, an apartment. He'd find us. He always says he'd find us." Monica didn't interrupt. She let the torrent of practical fears flow, knowing they were the bars on a prison cell. When Angie finally fell silent, spent, Monica reached slowly into her pocket. She pulled out a small, plain white business card and slid it across the table. It made a soft, scraping sound in the quiet room. "This is Jenny," Monica said. "She's connected to our outreach group, but more importantly, she used to work as a victim advocate. She runs a support group now. It's just women talking to other women who understand. No pressure, no commitments." Angie stared at the card as if it were a live wire. She didn't touch it. "There's also a shelter nearby," Monica continued, her tone factual, not pushy. "It's not what you're probably picturing. It's a converted farmhouse, clean and quiet. They help women start over. New place to stay, help with paperwork, job leads if you need one. And nobody knows you're there unless you want them to." She paused, letting the options settle. "If you ever decide you want out, no pressure, just whenever you're ready. There's a path. You don't have to see the whole staircase. You just have to take the first step." From a doorway, Lena watched, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. She saw her mother's hand twitch, then slowly, tentatively, reach for the card. Angie's fingers, chapped from washing dishes, picked it up. She didn't look at it. She just held it, her thumb tracing the edge. Angie's fingers twitched, then slowly, tentatively, closed around the card. It was the first step. "He'll be home soon," Angie said, her voice hollow. It was neither a rejection nor an acceptance. It was a statement of the relentless clock that governed their lives. Monica took the cue. She stood slowly, the chair legs scraping softly against the linoleum. "I'll leave you two alone." She took a step toward the door, then paused, turning back for one final, carefully aimed truth. "Angie, your daughter didn't come to us because she's scared of him." She let her gaze drift to Lena, then back to Angie. "She came because she's scared of losing you." It was the direct hit Monica had hoped for. Angie's breath hitched audibly. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes squeezing shut as a single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It was the first crack in the wall, the first admission of a pain she worked so hard to hide from her daughter. Monica walked to the doorway and placed a hand briefly on Lena's shoulder, a silent, solid gesture of solidarity. Then she let herself out, the screen door sighing shut behind her. The days after Monica's visit were filled with a tense, waiting silence. Time itself seemed to be holding its breath inside the small house on Maple Street. The white business card lived in Angie's nightstand drawer, tucked beneath a jumble of old receipts and a pair of broken earrings. It was a silent, paper-thin secret in a home ruled by a man who left the smell of gasoline and tension in his wake. But Lena noticed the changes. They were small, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. They were the first green shoots of the seed Monica had planted. Her mother started charging her phone in the linen closet, tucked behind a stack of towels, instead of on the kitchen counter where Brent could casually scroll through it. She began packing a small, secret bag for Lena, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, and hid it in the dark recesses of the hallway closet behind the winter coats. And most importantly, she stopped arguing back. When Brent's voice would rise, sharp and critical, Angie's responses became quiet, neutral murmurs. "Okay, Brent. You're right, Brent." It wasn't submission. It was strategy, a calculated retreat that hid a new, sharpening resolve beneath its surface. On Tuesday, while Brent was at work, Angie stood in front of the nightstand drawer for a full 5 minutes, her hand hovering over the handle. Lena sat on the porch just outside the open living room window, a book open in her lap, but her ears were straining for the sound she desperately hoped to hear. Finally, the drawer squeaked open. A moment later, Lena heard the faint, trembling tones of her mother's voice. "Hello? Is this Jenny? My name is Angie. Monica. Monica gave me your number." The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Lena heard fragments through the screen, her mother's voice cracking, then steadying, then cracking again. Words like shelter and restraining order and "where would we go?" floated out, mixed with long stretches of silence where Angie was just listening. When she finally hung up, there was no sound for a long time. Lena peeked inside and saw her mother standing in the kitchen, both hands pressed flat against the countertop, her head bowed as she took deep, shuddering breaths. She wasn't crying. She was gathering strength. That night, when she tucked Lena into bed, she held her a little longer, a little tighter. "I'm sorry," she whispered into her daughter's hair, her voice thick with a grief she could finally acknowledge. "I'm so sorry I made you carry this." Lena pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and said nothing. She just held on. The apology was a bomb on a wound she'd carried for so long. By Thursday, the plan was set. Jenny picked Angie up 2 blocks from the house, a discreet rendezvous while Brent was still at work. Angie attended her first support group meeting in a small, unmarked community center on the edge of town. She didn't say much that first night. She just sat in a circle with other women of all ages and backgrounds, and listened. She heard stories of manipulation, of broken promises, of fear that felt exactly like her own. She heard stories of escape, of rebuilding, of lives reclaimed. She saw the shadows under their eyes, and in some, a new light beginning to kindle. She came home with red-rimmed eyes and a strange, determined quiet. She had found her reflection in a room full of strangers, and she was no longer alone. Brent noticed the shift immediately. He was a predator, and he could sense the subtle change in the energy of his prey. He began to circle her, his questions laced with a new, suspicious edge. "You've been quiet," he'd say, his eyes narrowing over dinner. "Just tired," Angie would deflect, offering a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Where'd you go today?" he grumbled on Thursday evening, noticing her shoes by the door. "Just for a walk. Needed some air." He didn't explode. Not yet. But the tension in the house thickened, day by day, like humidity building before storm. The air grew heavy with unasked questions and unanswered lies. He watched her more closely. The normal, oppressive weight of his presence became sharper, more focused. He was trying to find the crack in her armor, the source of this new, unsettling calm. Lena felt it too. The house, which had always been a cage, was now a cage with a timer ticking down. Every creak of the floorboards, every slamming door made her jump. She slept with her secret bag of clothes in mind, her hand-drawn map of places we can go folded beneath her mattress. The fear was still there, but its nature was changing. It was no longer the dull, hopeless dread of the inevitable. It was the sharp, electric anxiety of a plan about to be set in motion. It was the fear of freedom. On Friday night, Brent announced he was going out. He didn't say where. He didn't say when he'd be back. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and slammed it hard enough to make the windows rattle in their frames. The sound was a familiar punctuation to their fear. They stood frozen in the living room, mother and daughter, listening to the aggressive growl of his truck engine fade down the street. The silence he left behind was different this time. It wasn't the silence of relief. It was the silence of a starting pistol. Angie turned to Lena, her eyes wide. "Get your bag," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The one in the closet." Lena didn't ask questions. She ran. Lena moved with a speed and purpose she didn't know she possessed. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back. She ran to the hallway closet, shoved aside the heavy winter coats, and grabbed the hidden backpack. It felt impossibly light for everything it represented. She swung it onto her shoulders, the straps digging in, a welcome anchor to reality. Angie was a whirlwind in the bedroom. Lena heard the sharp slide of a dresser drawer, the rustle of papers. Her mother emerged moments later, her face a mask of fierce concentration. She clutched a small, worn duffel bag in one hand and a coffee tin in the other. Inside the tin was the cash she'd been skimming from her tips for weeks, folded tight and hidden in the grounds. Essentials. Documents. A life condensed into whatever they could carry without him noticing. "Ready." Angie's voice was a tight wire of tension. Lena nodded, her throat too dry to speak. At the last second, she darted into her room and dropped to her knees, scrambling under the bed. Her fingers closed around a folded piece of paper, its edges soft and worn from handling. She shoved it into her pocket. "What's that?" Angie asked, already moving toward the back door, her eyes scanning the dark street through the window. Lena unfolded it as they stood in the dim kitchen. A hand-drawn map. Crayon lines in blue and green showed mountains, a winding road, a giant, smiling sun rising over it all. At the top, in her careful, blocky handwriting, were the words, "Places we can go." Angie's breath caught in her throat. The sheer, stubborn hope of it, hidden beneath a child's bed, broke her and remade her all at once. She knelt and pulled Lena into a fierce, crushing hug. "You've been planning this," she whispered, her voice cracking with a mixture of grief and awe. "I had to believe we'd go someday," Lena whispered back. There was no more time. They moved through the back door into the cool night air, leaving the kitchen light on, a false signal of normalcy. The screen door sighed shut behind them, its sound swallowed by the vast, free night. They didn't run, but walked quickly, purposefully, through the dew-damp grass of the backyard, cutting through to the adjacent street. Their shadows, stretched long and thin by a distant street lamp, looked like ghosts fleeing a haunting. 2 streets over, a dark sedan was parked, its engine running, but its headlights off. As they approached, the passenger door swung open. Jenny was behind the wheel, her face calm and focused in the dashboard's glow. She didn't ask if they were sure. She didn't offer comforting words. She simply nodded, a soldier acknowledging a mission in progress. "Get in." They scrambled into the car, Angie in the front, Lena in the back with their bags. The door thudded shut, a sound of profound finality. Jenny pulled away from the curb smoothly, without haste, not drawing any attention. She turned on the headlights only after they had rounded the corner, merging into the thin, Saturday night traffic, as if they were just anyone going anywhere. No one spoke. Lena pressed her face against the cool glass of the window, watching the familiar streets of her old life slide by and disappear. She saw the glowing sign of the diner where her mom worked, the park where she used to play. They became fragments of a past life, receding into the darkness. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the whisper of the tires on asphalt, a lullaby of escape. Angie stared straight ahead, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She was trembling, a fine, constant shake that seemed to come from her very core. She was leaving the devil she knew for a terrifying unknown. She was leaving behind her home, her job, every fragile thread of stability she had managed to weave. Angie looked back at her daughter's face, pale in the passing streetlights, and saw not the old, familiar fear, but a wide-eyed, watchful hope. Her own trembling began to still. The streetlights eventually gave way to the deeper dark of the county road. The houses thinned out, replaced by the looming shapes of trees and open fields. The air coming through the cars' vents smelled different, cleaner, of damp earth and growing things. After a 30-minute drive that felt both endless and instantaneous, Jenny turned onto a long, gravel driveway. It led to a large 2-story farmhouse, its windows glowing with a soft, golden light. A porch wrapped around the front, and a neat garden lined the path to the door. It looked safe. It looked peaceful. Jenny turned off the engine. "We're here." She led them to the front door, which was opened by a woman named Ruth. She was older, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't bombard them with questions or pity. She simply smiled, a warm, grounding expression. "Welcome," she said, her voice as steady as the house itself. "Let's get you settled." She showed them to a small, simple room on the first floor. 2 single beds with plain quilts, a dresser, a window overlooking the dark, quiet garden, and most importantly, a lock on the inside of the door. Ruth handed Angie a single, brass key. "This is yours," she said. "The kitchen is down the hall if you're hungry. My room is right at the top of the stairs. My door is always open day or night." Then she left them, closing the door softly behind her. The silence in the room was immense, but it was a different kind of silence than the one in their old house. This silence was soft. It was theirs. Lena stood in the middle of a room, just breathing it in. She could still feel the ghost of the jar in her hands, the weight of the coins. But here, in this quiet room with the lock on their side of the door, that weight had finally, miraculously lifted. She was still scared. But for the first time, it was the fear of something new, not the dread of something inevitable. She had traded a prison for a frontier, and the exchange, however terrifying, was the most beautiful thing she had ever known. The first morning at the shelter was not marked by an alarm clock, but by the sound of birdsong outside their window. Lena woke slowly, unsure of where she was for a single, disorienting moment. Then she saw the simple room, the lock on the door, and her mother sleeping deeply in the other bed. The lines of constant worry on Angie's face seemed softer in the morning light. For the first time in memory, her mother looked like she was actually resting, not just passed out from exhaustion. They joined Ruth and a few other women in the communal kitchen for breakfast. The atmosphere was quiet but not somber. There was a shared understanding, a quiet solidarity that didn't need words. No one asked prying questions. They were just women, sharing a meal, sharing a space, sharing a chance to breathe. Later that morning, Jenny returned, this time with a folder and a determined smile. She spread the contents on the kitchen table, applications for state aid, a list of low-cost housing providers, job listings printed from the library computer. The mountain of logistics that had once seemed insurmountable to Angie was now just a series of steps, laid out clearly by someone who had guided others up this same path. "One thing at a time," Jenny said, tapping the folder. "You don't have to do it all today. Let's start with this." She pointed to a simplified form for emergency assistance. "This will help with groceries and essentials for a few weeks. One less thing to worry about." Angie picked up the pen, her hand trembling only slightly, and signed her name. The scratch of the pen was the sound of a lock turning open. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was the author of her own rescue. Meanwhile, Lena explored the shelter's common room. There was a shelf of donated books and a bin of toys. She found a box of crayons and a fresh pad of paper. She didn't draw a map this time. Instead, she drew the farmhouse, with its wraparound porch and the garden, and a bright, confident sun overhead. Ranger, who had visited with Deak the day before, was a prominent feature in the drawing, sitting loyally by the front door. Deak and Monica's visit had been brief but pivotal. They hadn't come as saviors, but as friends. Deak, with Ranger at his side, had walked the property with Angie, pointing out the sturdy locks on the windows and the motion sensor lights, his presence a silent promise of security. Monica had brought a bag of groceries and a simple, prepaid phone. "For you," she'd said to Angie, "so you can make calls for jobs and apartments without using the shelter's line. It's yours." These acts of practical, no-strings-attached support were the building blocks of their new foundation. They weren't being given a handout, they were being given tools. And with each tool, the completed form, the new phone, the list of apartments, Angie's back straightened a little more. The weight was still there, but she was learning how to carry it. A few days later, Angie put on her best shirt and went to a job interview at a small family-owned cafe closer to the shelter. The owner, a woman named Carol with a kind, no-nonsense face, looked over Angie's application. "Jenny sent you," she stated, not asked. Angie nodded, her heart pounding. Carol looked her in the eye. "I don't care about your past. I care if you can show up on time and work hard. Can you do that?" "Yes," Angie said, her voice clear and firm. "I can." She was hired on the spot for the lunch shift. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. It was a paycheck earned in a place where no one knew Brent, where no one looked at her with pity or suspicion. It was hers. Lena, too, faced her own frontier. She was enrolled in a new school. The first day was a terrifying blur of unfamiliar hallways and new faces. She was the quiet new girl, the one from somewhere else. But at recess, a girl named Chloe with bright red pigtails offered her a swing. "Want to play?" she asked. Lena hesitated, then nodded. It was a small connection, a fragile thread, but as they swung higher and higher, Lena felt a laugh bubble up from a place inside her she thought had gone silent. It wasn't a miracle cure for all her fears, but it was a beginning. It was proof that a world existed beyond the four walls of fear she had lived in for so long. The future was no longer a terrifying question mark, but a blank page, and for the first time, she felt she had a hand in what would be written on it. The shelter was a sanctuary, but it was not a magic wand. The deep-seated fear that had been their constant companion for years did not simply vanish overnight. It mutated. For Angie, the silence of the night, once so comforting, now felt vast and full of unseen threats. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every set of headlights passing on the distant road, sent a jolt of irrational panic through her. Was it him? Had he found them? Logic, fortified by Jenny's assurances and the shelter's security protocols, said it was nearly impossible. But the primal part of her brain, the part trained for survival in a war zone of Brent's making, remained on high alert. She lay awake, listening to Lena's steady breathing from the other bed. This was the weight she had chosen, the weight of being the sole protector, the sole provider, the architect of a new life from the ground up. It was terrifying in a way that being a victim was not. Passivity had its own grim comfort. Agency was a cliff's edge. But then she would remember the alternative, the weight of Lena's fear, the weight of the hidden bruises, the weight of the jar on the counter. This new weight was heavy, but it was hers to carry. She could stand up straight under it. Lena, in contrast, seemed to be adapting with a resilience that left Angie in awe. The child embraced the shelter's routines, helping Ruth set the table for dinner, watering the plants in the common room. She was like a parched plant finally receiving water, soaking up the normalcy. But even she had her moments. A raised voice from another room would make her freeze, her eyes going wide for a second before she remembered where she was. The fear was still there, a ghost in her nervous system, but it was losing its power with every peaceful day that passed. A week after their arrival, Deak and Monica visited again, this time with a purpose beyond a welfare check. Deak carried a brand-new, sturdy toolkit. Monica held a bag of groceries and a potted herb garden for their windowsill. "Housewarming," Monica said, handing the thriving plants to Angie. "Something to nurture. It helps." Deak set the toolbox down with a solid thud. "All right. Point me to whatever's broken, loose, or leaky." There was nothing significantly wrong, but Angie showed him the bathroom faucet that had a persistent drip and a kitchen cabinet door in the common area that didn't close flush. Deak got to work. The sounds of his tools, the ratchet of a wrench, the firm tap of a hammer, weren't intrusive. They were the sounds of a fortress being reinforced. It was the sound of a community saying, "We're still here. Your peace is our project, too." As Deak worked, Ranger did his own rounds, sniffing the corners of each room before settling contentedly in a patch of sun, officially approving the new territory. Lena sat beside him, leaning against his warm body, quietly telling him about her new friend Chloe at school. Watching them, Angie felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. They weren't just giving her a toolkit and plants. They were giving her confidence. They were showing her that she could build a life here, and that they would be there to help steady the ladder. Later, as they were preparing to leave, Deak handed Angie a slip of paper. It wasn't a business card. It was a phone number. "That's my personal cell," he said, his voice low. "Monica's, mine, and Jenny's numbers are on there. You're not in this alone, day or night. If you need anything, a weird car parked outside, a pipe bursts, or you just need to hear a friendly voice, you call. Understood?" Angie took the paper, her throat tight. This was different from the support group or the shelter's resources. This was personal. This was a lifeline thrown directly from one human being to another. "Understood," she managed to whisper. "Thank you." That night, for the first time since they'd arrived, Angie slept through the night. The fears were still there, whispering at the edges of her mind. But they were now quieted by a louder, stronger current, the current of being seen, being supported, and being believed in. The walls of her new life weren't just drywall and paint. They were being built with kindness, one solid, reliable brick at a time. And for the first time, she truly believed they would hold. The key to their new apartment was cold and brass, but in Angie's hand, it felt warmer than any precious metal. It was a Tuesday when they moved in, their possessions meager. The second-hand couch, a few bags of clothes, the coffee tin with its hidden savings, and a single box of kitchen items. It didn't matter. It was theirs. The air smelled of fresh paint and undiscovered futures. Lena ran from room to empty room, her footsteps echoing on the bare floors, her laughter bouncing off the walls as she claimed the space with her presence. "This can be my room," she yelled from the smaller bedroom. "And you can have the big one, Mom." Angie stood in the center of the living room, listening to the unfettered joy in her daughter's voice. It was a sound she had feared was lost forever. She looked at the blank walls, not as a sign of poverty, but as a blank canvas. They could paint them any color they wanted. They could hang pictures without worrying they would be ripped down in a fit of rage. This emptiness was the most beautiful fullness she had ever known. The first night in their new home, they ate pizza from a box, sitting on the floor surrounded by unpacked bags. They played music from the prepaid phone Monica had given them, something they could never do before without criticism. They danced, silly and free, in the middle of the living room, their shadows giant and joyful on the empty walls. It was a celebration of silence, of peace, of a door that locked from inside, a door they controlled. But the ghosts of the past were tenacious. A few days after moving in, Angie came home from her shift at the cafe to find Lena sitting perfectly still on the couch, her face pale. A single sharp knock echoed through the apartment, Lena whispered. Then silence. But when I looked, no one was there. Angie's heart hammered against her ribs. The old fear, cold and familiar, washed over her. She checked the locks on the doors and windows, her hands trembling. She peered through the blinds at the empty street below. It was probably just a neighbor or a delivery person at the wrong address, but the rational thought was no match for the years of conditioning. The sanctuary of their new home felt suddenly fragile. The next day, unable to shake the lingering anxiety, Angie used the number Deak had given her. Her voice was shaky as she explained what had happened, feeling foolish for being so scared of a simple knock. Deak didn't dismiss her fear. "You're not being paranoid," he said, his voice calm and certain. "You're being careful. There's a difference. I'll be right there." An hour later, he pulled up in his truck with Ranger and his toolbox. He didn't just check the locks. He reinforced the strike plates on the door frames with longer, heavier screws. He installed a simple, sturdy chain lock high up on the front door, out of Lena's reach, but within easy access for Angie. "This is so you can feel safe," he explained as he worked. Feeling safe is just as important as being safe. Ranger, sensing the heightened tension, did a slow, deliberate patrol of the small apartment, sniffing in the corners and behind the doors before settling on a rug in the living room with a contented sigh, as if to say, "All clear. I've got this." Seeing the newly reinforced locks, Angie took a deep, full breath, the first one since she'd come home. It was being replaced by something solid, something durable. It was the feeling of a foundation being cemented, not just for an apartment, but for their lives. Later that week, Monica stopped by with a housewarming gift, a set of colorful throw pillows for the couch, and a framed print of a peaceful landscape. "Every home needs a little color," she said, smiling. As Monica was leaving, she paused at the door. "You know, the bravest part isn't always leaving," she said softly. "Sometimes the bravest part is building what comes after." Her words stayed with Angie long after she'd left. She looked around the apartment, at the new pillows, at Lena's drawing of the farmhouse taped to the refrigerator, at the reinforced lock on the door. They were building. Brick by brick, moment by moment, they were building a life. The fear was still a whisper, but it was no longer a scream. It was being drowned out by the sounds of their new beginning. The hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of turning pages as Lena read on the couch, the simple, profound silence of a peaceful evening. They were not just safe, they were home. Weeks turned into a month, and the new life began to find its rhythm. It was a rhythm composed of small, ordinary sounds that were, to Angie and Lena, nothing short of miraculous. The predictable gurgle of the coffee maker in the morning. The rustle of Lena's homework papers spread across the kitchen table in the evening. The comfortable silence that fell when they were both reading, each lost in their own world, yet profoundly together. Angie's job at the cafe settled into a routine. Carol, her boss, was firm but fair, and the work was straightforward. She learned the regular's orders, the construction worker who wanted his coffee black, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for tomato soup and a grilled cheese. They called her by name. They smiled. They treated her like a person, not a problem. With each shift, the knot of anxiety that had lived in her stomach for years loosened another degree. Her paychecks, while modest, were hers alone. She opened a bank account, and the act of depositing that first check felt as significant as signing the lease on their apartment. One afternoon, she used a portion of her tips to buy a gallon of paint, a soft, buttery yellow for the living room. That weekend, she and Lena spent 2 days painting, covering the sterile white walls with warmth. They got more paint on themselves than on the walls, laughing as they did it. The transformation was more than cosmetic, it was acclaiming. They were no longer just occupying a space, they were imbuing it with their own light. Lena's world was expanding, too. Her friendship with Chloe solidified. She was invited to Chloe's house after school, where she experienced the easy, noisy chaos of a family that wasn't walking on eggshells. She saw Chloe's parents disagree about what to make for dinner, their debate ending in laughter, not slammed doors. It was a revelation. She started sleeping with her bedroom door open, a small but telling sign of her growing sense of security. The veterans' presence evolved. They were no longer first responders to a crisis, but had become part of the fabric of their new normal. Hicks stopped by one Saturday with a second-hand bicycle he'd tuned up for Lena. "Every kid needs a bike," he grumbled, as if embarrassed by his own kindness. Deak and Ranger became regular weekend visitors. Deak would find small projects, hanging shelves, fixing a wobbly chair, while Ranger would stretch out in a patch of sun, his contented presence a quiet reassurance. One Sunday, Deak taught Lena how to change a tire on his truck, showing her how to operate the jack and tighten the lug nuts. "It's not about being a mechanic," he told her, as she strained to loosen a stubborn bolt. "It's about knowing you can handle things when they go wrong." Deak pointed to a faint scar on his own knuckle. "First time I tried that, I skinned him good. You're a faster learner." The fear didn't vanish entirely. There were still moments, a loud noise from a neighboring apartment, a man on the street who shared Brent's build, that would make them both flinch. But the flinches were becoming smaller, the recovery quicker. The fear was no longer the main character in their story. It was becoming a minor one, occasionally making a cameo appearance before being shooed off stage by the daily acts of their courageous new lives. One evening, as Angie was tucking Lena into bed, her daughter looked up at her, her face serious in the dim light. "Mom, are we happy now?" The question was so simple, so direct, it took Angie's breath away. She thought of the yellow walls, the bike leaning against the porch, the sound of Deak's laughter still echoing in her memory. She looked at her daughter's face, no longer shadowed by dread, but open and curious about the future. She smoothed Lena's hair back from her forehead. "We're getting there, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're definitely getting there." And as she turned out the light, she knew it was the most true thing she had said in years. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were slowly and surely learning how to live. The rhythm of normal was becoming their song, and they were finally learning the words. The following Saturday, Lena stood before the full-length mirror on her closet door, critically examining her reflection. She wore a new green shirt, a gift from Monica, and her best jeans. She wasn't just getting ready to go out. She was preparing for a ceremony. Today was the day she would complete the circle. "Are you sure about this?" Angie asked from the doorway, her voice laced with a concern that had become rare. She was dressed in her own cafe uniform, ready for her shift, her keys in hand. Lena met her mother's eyes in the mirror. "I'm sure. I need to do this. For me." Angie saw the determination in her daughter's face, the same fierce resolve that had carried a jar of coins into a room full of strangers. This wasn't the fear-driven courage of desperation. This was the confident courage of closure. She nodded. "Okay, I'll meet you there after my shift. Be careful." The walk to the Iron Valley Veterans Outreach Center was the same route she had taken months ago, but every step felt different. The weight was gone. The fear was gone. She carried only a small, flat object wrapped in brown paper under her arm. When she pushed open the familiar door, the same wall of sound and smell hit her. Sizzling bacon, strong coffee, loud laughter. For a moment, she hesitated on the threshold, a ghost of her old self. Then Ranger, lying behind the counter as always, lifted his head. He let out a happy, recognizing woof and trotted over, his tail wagging a joyful greeting. The spell was broken. Deak looked up from the griddle, following the dog's path. When he saw Lena, his face broke into the same wide, genuine grin she remembered. "Well, I'll be," he boomed. "Look who's back." All eyes turned to her. Hicks paused, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. Monica, organizing donated clothes, looked up and smiled. The attention wasn't intimidating this time. It felt like a welcome home. Lena walked straight to the counter, just as she had before. But this time, her steps were light. Her shoulders were relaxed. She held out the brown paper-wrapped rectangle. "I made this for you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "For everyone." Deak wiped his hands carefully on his apron, a gesture of respect. He took the package and unfolded the paper with a tenderness that belied his large, calloused hands. It was a drawing, matted and framed behind simple glass. A detailed motorcycle with two riders, one large, one small, headed toward a huge, brilliantly colored rising sun. The road beneath them was a vibrant yellow, and the sky was filled with hope. Beneath the image, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for coming with us." Deak stared at the drawing, his thumb gently tracing the glass over the two riders on the road. The noise of the room seemed to fade away. He saw their entire story, the fear, the plea, the rescue, the journey toward the light. He saw the two riders, and he knew exactly who they were. He had to clear his throat twice before he could speak, his voice rough with emotion. This is something else, kid. Really." He looked from the drawing to Lena's face, her eyes shining with pride. He set it carefully on the counter, propping it against the napkin holder for all to see. "Your mom doing okay?" he asked quietly. Lena nodded, a real, full smile spreading across her face. "She's different now. She laughs more. She got a promotion to shift lead at the cafe. And we're planting a garden on our balcony." She said it with the pride of someone listing monumental achievements, and to Deak they were. From behind the counter, Deak reached over and gently ruffled her hair. "That's real good, Lena. Real good." As they spoke, Lena's eyes drifted to the countertop, to a spot near the old cash register. There, exactly where she had left it months ago, sat her glass jar. The salsa jar, still packed to the brim with pennies, nickels, and dimes. A fine layer of dust had settled on the lid. No one had touched it. The coins were exactly as she had arranged them, a silent, sacred monument to the day a little girl asked for help and a group of veterans answered. She pointed. "You didn't use it." Deak followed her gaze. He smiled, a slow, thoughtful smile. "Nope," he said softly. "Never needed to." The truth settled over them, warm and profound. The value was never in the coins. It was in the courage it took to bring them. It was in the desperate hope they represented. It was in the willingness of a group of veterans to look past the money and see the human being holding it. Angie arrived then, slipping through the crowd. She stepped up to the counter, her expression a mixture of gratitude and hard-won confidence. She looked at the framed drawing, then at the dusty jar beside it, and her eyes glistened. "We owe you everything," she said to Deak, her voice thick. "You, Monica, everyone. You saw my daughter when I was too blind to see her. You gave us a path when I thought we were trapped." Deak shook his head, dismissing the debt. "You did the hard part, Angie. You made the choice. You got in the car. We just held the door open." Monica came over and put an arm around Angie's shoulders. "You built the life," she said softly. "We just handed you a few tools." The moment was broken by Ranger nudging Lena's hand, demanding attention. Lena laughed a bright, unburdened sound and scratched the dog behind his ears. On the counter, the drawing of the motorcycle heading into the sun stood next to the forgotten jar of coins. One was a testament to a journey completed, the other a relic of the moment it began. Both were priceless. The circle was now complete, unbroken, and stronger than ever. The story of Lena and her jar of coins did not end at the counter of the Veterans Outreach Center. It rippled outward, becoming a quiet legend within the community. The framed drawing found a permanent home on the wall behind the counter, a daily reminder of why they kept the doors open and the coffee hot. The jar remained beside it, untouched, a sacred relic. For the veterans, the experience reaffirmed the core of their mission. It wasn't just about providing a meal or a place to gather. It was about restoring a sense of purpose. They had transitioned from warriors on a foreign battlefield to guardians on a home front. And in doing so, they had found a new way to heal their own invisible wounds. Deak found himself less haunted by the ghosts of his past when he was busy fixing a leaky faucet for a single mother. Hicks discovered his gravelly voice could comfort as well as command. The mission had given them a new objective: be the wall that breaks the storm. For Angie, the journey was one of reclamation. She had reclaimed her voice, her agency, and her right to a life without fear. The promotion to shift lead at the cafe was more than a raise. It was a testament to her newfound confidence. She started taking a community college class in business management one night a week, a dream she had buried so long ago she'd forgotten it existed. She was no longer just surviving. She was building a future, and for the first time, she believed she was the one who would get to live in it. And for Lena, the girl who had carried the weight of her mother's safety in a glass jar, the transformation was the most profound. The world was no longer a place of constant threat, but a landscape of possibility. She joined a soccer team at the community center and discovered she was fast. She brought Chloe over to their apartment, and the sound of two girls giggling in her bedroom was a melody she never tired of. The hand-drawn map was now tucked away in a memory box, its purpose fulfilled. She didn't need a map to fictional places anymore. She was busy exploring the world right in front of her. One evening, as autumn began to paint the edges of the leaves, the entire group gathered for a potluck dinner at Angie and Lena's apartment. The small space was filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked food. Deak and Hicks argued good-naturedly about the best way to grill burgers on the small balcony. Monica and Angie compared notes on their respective classes. Ranger, in his usual spot, supervised the proceedings with a contented expression. Lena watched them all from the kitchen doorway, a glass of lemonade in her hand. She looked at her mother, who was laughing freely, her face illuminated by joy, not shadowed by fear. She looked at Deak, whose large, capable hands now gently held a plate of cookies. She looked at the framed drawing of the motorcycle on their own living room wall, a duplicate she had made for themselves. She thought about the jar still sitting on the counter at the center. They had never counted the money. They had never needed to. Its value was immeasurable because it wasn't money at all. The jar was a symbol. Its value was the courage it took to bring it. Her courage had been the spark, a small, desperate flame in the dark. The veteran's courage had been the kindling, the willingness to see that spark and shelter it. And her mother's courage had been the fuel, the immense, world-altering bravery it took to finally leave, to build a new life from the ashes of the old. The story was not about a rescue. It was about a chain of courage, each link essential, each act of bravery enabling the next. It was about a little girl who refused to do nothing, and the community that refused to look away. As the evening wound down and goodbyes were said, Lena stood with her mother on the porch, watching the taillights of their friends' cars disappear down the street. The night air was cool and clean. The lock on their door was strong. The walls of their home were a warm, buttery yellow. Angie put an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Happy?" she asked, echoing Lena's question from weeks before. Lena leaned into her mother's side, the solid, steady presence that was her true home. "Yes," she said, and it was the simplest, most complete truth she had ever spoken. They stood there for a long time, two survivors under a sky full of stars, no longer running from the past, but facing the future together. The journey had been long, and the road had been hard, but they had reached the place on the map marked safe, and they had built it themselves. So we turn the question to you. The next time you see someone carrying an invisible jar, what will you do? Will you be the one to look away? Or will you be the one to ask, "Is that enough? Let me help you carry it." This story wasn't about heroes and victims. It was about a chain of courage, a child's courage to ask, and a community's courage to answer. Lena's jar wasn't about money, it was about hope. The veterans didn't see coins, they saw a human being needing help. The world is full of people carrying invisible jars, jars filled with fear, with loneliness, with silent struggles. They're in our schools, our workplaces, our neighborhoods. They might be our friends, our family, sometimes even ourselves. This story challenges us to notice, to be the kind of person who isn't afraid to ask, "Are you okay?" The kind of person who will listen, who will help plant a seed, or simply stand beside someone and say, "You're not alone in this." You don't need to be a hero. You just need to be present, to see the person behind the struggle, to be the one who helps carry the jar. So we ask again, what will you do when you see someone carrying an invisible jar? Will you look away? Or will you reach out your hand and say, "Let me help you carry that"? The choice is yours. The opportunity is everywhere. The need is now.
If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.